Members, the House will come to order. The clerk will please ring the bell. Please register. Have all registered? Have all registered? Members, quorum is present. Tan Parker? Absolutely. Members, the House and gallery will please rise for the invocation, which will be offered by our new colleague who we're excited to have with us, the Honorable Carl Sherman of Dallas County. Reverend Sherman.
Shall we pray? Jehovah God, we stand in awe of your presence. Lord, knowing that you are not only Lord of heaven, but you are Lord of earth. We pray, Lord, that we would conduct ourselves in such a way that it would be pleasing to you, Lord. Father God, you are the great God of all. There is none other like you. None of us are worthy of the recognition that you've bestowed on us. But we thank God that you consider us worthwhile, that you would give your life for us, that we might strive to be better women and men, to do your good will, to please you, Lord. For Lord knows that there are so many things that we do not know. There are worlds that we have yet to discover, but you know all things, Lord. And we pray, dear God, that we would all seek your guidance from East Texas to West Texas, from North Texas to South Texas and Central Texas to the Panhandle to the Rio Grande, Lord. We pray, Lord, that we would all come together as one, Republicans and Democrats, that we would put aside party rhetoric, that we would be one as you and your Father are one. Lord, bless the men and women here, from our speaker, Dennis Bonham, to Stan Lampert, to Harold Dutton, to Yvonne Davis, to Mary Gonzalez. Lord, there's so many of us here gathered today, and we strive to do your will, and Lord knows we all need you more than ever. Father God, finally, we want to just pray for the 28 million plus Texans that we represent, that we would represent them in such a way that the issues and concerns that we express and vote on would comport with your will, and that we would be the same in private as in public. It's in the mighty name of Jesus that we pray. It's in your name that we believe. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Make sure we welcome Carl, all our senior members. He's a man of faith, and he's a smiling, friendly man at all times, so we're proud to have him. Thank you. The chair now recognizes, thank you, the Honorable Ken King of Hemphill County. He's going to lead us in the U.S. and Texas pledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, guests, please join me in pledging to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now please join me in pledging to the great state of Texas.
Honor the Texas flag. Pledge allegiance to the United Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Members, please excuse Representative Dwayne Bohack because of an illness on a motion by Representative Rick Miller. Is there any objection? Chair is none, so ordered. Please excuse Representative Tam Parker because of important business on a motion by Dean Craddock. Is there any objection? Chair is none, so ordered. Please excuse Representative Eddie Lucio because of important business on a motion by Representative Anna Hernandez. Is there any objection? Chair is none, so ordered. You want to do Charlie? Members, members, I ask for your quick attention. I'm going to recognize Chairman Guerin. He would like to make an announcement about the inaugural. So please listen to Chairman Guerin quickly. Chair recognizes Representative Guerin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the inaugural packets for each of the members are available in the sergeant's office to pick up. In this packet, you'll get a badge to hang around your neck. You get 2 inaugural prayer service tickets, 2 barbecue tickets, and 2 mass tickets, as well as 4 tickets to the inaugural itself. You need to pick these up personally. We're not going to give them out to staff, and they're available in the sergeant's office starting today. If you decide you don't need them, you can pick them up and give them to somebody. We'd like to fill all the seats, and the House has 600 seats to fill. So please pick them up and please use them. And members, if you have not put any money in your account for the members' lounge, you can also do that in the sergeant's office today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, we do Doctor of the Day. The chair recognizes the Honorable Julie Johnson of Dallas County. Members, please give Representative Johnson your attention. She's going to introduce our Doctor of the Day, and we're proud to have Representative Johnson with us. Members, let's please give our respect and courtesy to Representative Johnson introducing our Doctor of the Day. Chair recognizes Representative Johnson of Dallas County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my great privilege and honor to introduce our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Dobriara. He is from Coppell, Texas. He's an internal medicine physician who practices at the Dallas Medical Center. He is ready and able to attend to your every need of anxiety on our first official day. And welcome, Doctor. We're so honored to have you here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Good job.
Mr. Doorkeeper.
Mr. Speaker, I have a messenger from the Senate at the door of the House.
Admit the messenger.
Mr. Speaker, I am directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has taken the following action. The Senate has passed the following measures. SCR 3 by Whitmire, providing for a joint session to canvass the votes for the governor.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Members, the House will stand at ease for about 10 minutes until, what time is it? 10:24. Members, the House will please come to order. We're going to get going, members. Members, we have a couple procedural resolutions that are going to require record votes. So we're going to take care of those procedural resolutions with a record vote, and then we'll move forward. Members, the chair lays out SCR number 4. The clerk will read the resolution.
SCR 4 by Whitmire, granting the legislature permission to adjourn for more than 3 days during the period beginning on Thursday, January 10, 2019 and ending on Tuesday, January 15, 2019.
Members, well, y'all already did it. I was going to ask for a little bit of order. Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, as you know, the Constitution requires each chamber to grant permission for the other chamber to recess for more than 3 days. Our plan is to recess tomorrow and then not convene again until Tuesday. So SCR number 4 is the resolution to accomplish that procedurally. I move passage.
Members, you've heard the movement for passage on SCR 4. It's a record vote, requires a record vote. Record vote's granted. The clerk will please ring the bell. Show Representative Cecil Bell voting aye. Show Dr. Oliverson voting aye. Members, we'll give you time. Show Mr. Rainey voting aye. Have all voted. There being 143 ayes and no nays, the resolution is finally passed. Adopted. Chair lays out SCR number 3. The clerk will read the resolution.
SCR 3 by Whitmire, providing for a joint session to canvass the votes for the governor and lieutenant governor and for a joint session for the inaugural ceremony.
Chair recognizes Representative Ray to lay out the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This resolution authorizes the joint session on Tuesday, January 15th, as well as other procedural matters related to the inauguration of the governor and lieutenant governor. I move passage.
Question occurs on the passage of SCR number 3. It's a record vote. The clerk will please ring the bell. Have all voted? Have all voted? There being 142 ayes and no nays, the resolution is adopted. Mr. Guerin. Members, we're going to do the housekeeping resolution, and then after that, we'll do the rules. Chair lays out House Resolution number 3. The clerk will read the resolution.
H.R. 3 by Guerin, adopting the housekeeping resolution for the House of Representatives of the 86th Legislature.
Chair recognizes Representative Guerin to explain the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I'd like to go over the changes that we're making in this housekeeping resolution from the previous one. And at that time, if any of you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them. The first change is we changed all the legislature's dates and account numbers to correspond with the 86th legislature. And this one, there's several of you have had questions about the provision relating to the national motto on the electronic message board, "In God We Trust." In the 79th legislature, we passed a bill that required the Preservation Board to put it above the dais. And since that time, it has not been displayed on the electronic message board. And so this is just cleaning the language up, is all it's doing. "In God We Trust" is permanently there, it's above the speaker, and it is displayed all the time. On the electronic message board, it was not displayed all the time. So it is, "In God We Trust" is not being taken out of this chamber. It is there, and it'll always be there. We specify who the officers of the House are. The members' operating budget for session only, I'm proposing to raise it from $14,250, which it was last time, to $15,250, and then after session, it will go back to $13,500. Some of you had questions as to why we couldn't keep it that way all the time, and it's because of it's our budget. We do not have the money to do that. With per diem going up, travel reimbursement going up, and with this increase to $15,250, which every $1,000 is $150,000 a month, and the House does not have the money to maintain $15,250 for the interim. Then current provisions in the personnel manual relating to the biennial harassment, sexual harassment policy that the House has. The House does not tolerate sexual harassment by members, by staff, or by interns. And so we're updating the policy, and we're going to update the training so it will be more rigorous and will be required for all members and staff to take it every 2 years within 30 days. Then the provision relating to the value of committee gifts has been changed from $75 to 1 day's per diem. With that, members, I'll be happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Members, we have on the desk at this time two amendments, I apologize, two amendments. So if you have any other amendments, would you please get them filed? Because we have two that we'll begin with now. We have yours, Mr. Schaefer. And if there are any other amendments, please go ahead and file them, and we'll get to them. So we'll go with our first amendment. Following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Is this the King?
Amendment by Schaefer.
Chair recognizes Mr. Schaefer to explain his amendment.
Good morning. Members, you might want to listen to this because this affects your staff, affects how you operate your budgets, to pay your staff, to hire your staff, to keep your staff. This is my Chief of Staff, Mr. Richard Raymond here. I don't have the money to pay him. Members, this amendment for the next fiscal year, which will begin September 1, will take our office budgets monthly to $15,250, which is what the current housekeeping resolution has for the session. But because we did not contemplate this when we passed the appropriations bill last session, I didn't feel it was appropriate to make an amendment to raise our budgets for the current fiscal year. We have a hard time retaining good staff. We have a hard time paying people what they're worth at times. Cost of living in Austin and in many parts of the state is not what it was in January 2015 when we were at 13.5. If we don't amend this budget, members, our office budgets will stay the same place they were in January or May of 2015 and carry on for another 2 years. There will be 6 years of no budget increases during the interim. I don't believe that 6 years of no budget increases for our staff in the interim is what we should do. Now, I'm a fiscal conservative, so you're asking me, why am I doing this? Well, my staff work hard during the interim, serving our constituents, but we also, when we are looking at what agencies are doing with the money that we've appropriated, we ask questions, we dig, we research. If members of the public bring us something that we believe there is waste, fraud, or abuse, we dig into it. My staff does that. But when we lose people that have institutional knowledge, when we lose people that are skilled, that hurts our ability to save the state money. Let me tell you, if only one office chose to use this money wisely and go look into what state agencies are doing during the interim, you're going to save far more than this amendment would cost. So we can say, leave it as it is, and we'll go 6 years without raising our office budgets for our staff during the interim. Or we can say, in the next appropriation bill, which will kick in September 1 of the next fiscal year, we will go back up to 15,250, which is what we are during session. So I'm going to state it clearly one more time. The current House resolution is raising our office budgets from $13,500 to $15,250, but only for this session. My amendment will say that after session, when September 1st rolls around, our office budgets will go back up to $15,250 and then remain that way for the rest of the interim. We will be able to contemplate that office raise in the appropriations budget. Members, I move passage.
Chair recognizes Mr. Guerin in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate Mr. Schaefer's sentiments, but what that amounts to is $262,500 a month. This puts the pressure on this would put the pressure on appropriations to appropriate more money for the House. I don't know whether that would even get out of the Senate, and so we do not have the money to do this, and so I have to oppose this. I agree that we need more money, but it has not been budgeted. The Appropriations Committee has not met or agreed to do this, and we would also have to get it through the Senate because, we don't get to appropriate our own money. The Senate has to agree to it as well. So that I'd have to ask you members to please vote no on this amendment.
Chair recognizes Mr. Schaefer to close.
Well, the appropriators haven't appropriated anything for the next budget. The appropriators have the pressure to set our priorities when they meet. So if we vote for this, we expect the appropriations process to take care of it. I did speak to Chairman Guerin's counterpart in the Senate, Chairman Kolkhorst, and told her what my intention was. And let me tell you, she said the House is going to do what the House is going to do, and the Senate's going to do what the Senate's going to do. So if we pass this, we have the appropriation process to handle.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Raymond.
Would the gentleman yield?
Mr. Gentleman yield
for a question?
I will yield for questions.
Gentleman yields for a question, Mr. Raymond.
I love Charlie Guerin, but with all due respect, if we pass this here, yes, the Senate has to approve it too, but we have to approve their budget as well, don't we?
We do.
And their budgets are generous, aren't they?
Their budgets are very generous.
Well, it seems to me that the Senate should let us run the House, and we'll let them run the Senate. And if the House decides to support your amendment, which I intend to vote for, I think the Senate will work with us. And so, members, I hope you'll listen to my colleague. And we often disagree on things, but not always. He used to be my chief of staff, and now I'm his. I just don't think it's a good argument to say that we have to worry about whether or not the Senate would approve it, because we have to approve theirs as well. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I do think that sometimes we can be penny wise and pound foolish, and maybe this is the case.
Members, the question is on the adoption of the Schaefer Amendment. We're going to attempt the division vote that I had discussed with each caucus on Monday. This is a division vote. You can vote from your desks, members. Just hit your button and it'll light up. Show Mr. Toth voting no. There being 47 ayes and 81 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. Members, please give your courtesy to Representative Price. He would like to make an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just want to take a moment to direct your attention to the Northwest Gallery. We have students from the Panhandle who are participating in a congressional state meet at the University of Texas and here at the state capitol. Today's Super Congress sessions 1 and 2 are happening this afternoon. If those students will stand, we want to welcome you to your capital. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, very important recognition by Representative Ferrara.
Just to add on to what Representative Price said, my niece is actually in that group. If she'll stand up, Chloe. Did I miss? Oh, I see. All right. Thank you. Welcome, y'all.
Mr. King. Following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Amendment by King of Parker.
Chair recognizes Mr. King of Parker to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, and first I want to thank Representatives Collier and Howard and Guerin and all the others who worked on this workplace section. I think it's very important, and we need this. I think it's good for the state, and it's good for us as a body. All this really is, in my mind, is just a clarifying amendment. I believe the intent of the rule is for an investigator, if a complaint is filed against a member, the intent is that the committee still have full authority and jurisdiction over that investigation and whatever the results of it may be. I want it, but it says if it's a member, that they will appoint a third-party investigator to come in and look into that matter. My concern was that that might unintentionally, in future legislatures, because we're setting up something that's probably going to be around for a long time and should be, my concern was that it could unintentionally evolve from being an investigator into a special prosecutor. And so this simply says that the investigator's sole job is to investigate the allegations of the complaint thoroughly and completely, and then to report those back to the committee. Then if the committee needs to refer this for some type of legal action or something else, that's the committee's job and the committee's discretion. What we don't want, I don't believe, is a third-party investigator, evolving into more than what is the House intent. And I can just tell you, I've been involved on the plaintiff's side in a couple of cases, and then also when I was a cop and seeing a lot of internal affairs complaints. And it's just so important to make sure that we're very specific in what we're saying, particularly since future legislators and committees will be looking at this. It also makes sure that we don't end up with someone handing the House ultimately a bill for hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigative expenses. So that's the point, and I believe it's acceptable to the author, and I believe Representative Collier and Donna Howard are okay with it too.
Members, Mr. King offers an amendment. It's acceptable to the author. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted.
Thank you, Charlie.
Members, we do not have any more amendments to H.R. 3. The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I want to thank the sexual harassment work group for all of the time and effort they put into this, as well as the parliamentarians. A lot of work has gone into this language, and I move passage.
Members, the question is on the adoption of House Resolution 3. Members, this requires a record vote. Record vote is granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Have all voted? Show Representative Canales voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all voted? All voted. There being 142 ayes and 0 nays, House Resolution 3 is passed or adopted. Members, we're about to begin the rules, and I do want to thank Representative Howard and Representative Collier and their working group for the great work they did and the cooperation they showed on moving this body forward on sexual harassment policy. Thank you all for great work and great collaboration. Members, let's have good order and respect for those at the mic. We're going to take on one of the most important responsibilities of the session, and that's adopting the rules by which this body governs itself. So please give your respect and attention to those at the mics and take your conversations outside the rail. Chair lays out House Resolution 4. The clerk will read the resolution.
H.R. 4 by Smithy, adopting the rules of the House for the 86th legislature.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Every year the House adopts its rules for the session, and that's what we're doing now with this resolution. Our practice over the last few sessions, or more than a few sessions, based on my memory, is that we have had minimal changes to the rules, but we have tweaked here and there. Occasionally we've made a fairly substantive change to the rules, and that's certainly the intent here today. Speaker Bonin asked me to help kind of put together a deal. on the rules to be able to get member input. He asked that it be member-driven and that it be the process be as transparent as possible. This was a fairly difficult situation this time for two reasons. One is, of course, anytime you have a change in leadership in the House, it complicates things a bit. And the other thing, as far as delay, and then the other thing is we had a very short time window this time because of the calendar. But you all should have received yesterday a copy of the proposed rules. I wanted to go over just a few of those proposals, if I could. Many of those are technical. They are non-substantive in nature. I think that the big changes you'll notice are the changes to standing committees in the House. Under these rules, the number of standing committees is reduced by, I think it's 4 committees. We have a couple of eliminations of committees, and we have a couple of committees that are being merged with each other, and those are in the rule. I think the big difference you'll notice is, first of all, some changes to general investigating and ethics, which will now become general investigating. Some of their jurisdiction will go over to state affairs. We also have international trade and intergovernmental affairs is merged with economic and small business development. So look at those committee changes carefully. The second thing that I think you'll notice about the rules is a change in the nature of the local and consent calendar and how it's operated. Right now, where these rules are basically designed to kind of incorporate what has been the practice in the past, but when a bill is removed from the local and consent calendar, it can either be removed or postponed, and the intent here is that in order to keep a bill from going over to the regular calendar, you would need, to do that, you would have to have a 2/3 vote. Those are the main changes that have been made. I don't think any of them are particularly substantive. There are some amendments that are intended to basically bring some things back to the way they've been done in the past. And so with that, I'll be glad, if there's no questions, we can move on to the amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Smithy. Following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Smithy.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy to explain the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, what this was, in the draft that was filed yesterday, it went to 10 members would have to sign a statement to take a bill, remove a bill from the local and consent calendar. That was a pretty substantive change. I would ask you to approve this amendment, adopt this amendment, which would go back to the five members that we currently have in the rules right now. So I would move adoption.
Mr. Smithy offers an amendment. It's acceptable to the author. Is there any objection? The chair is none. The amendment is adopted. Following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Amendment by Murphy.
Chair recognizes Representative Murphy to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, members. This rule change would address what happens when we have a pending point of order on a bill. Currently, as you all know, unless a member is willing to withdraw their point of order and the other member is willing to postpone their bill, the House business comes to a screeching halt while the point of order is resolved. These determinations sometimes are quick, but that's not always the case, and I don't think that's always going to occur in the future either. These delays to the rest of the calendar, to our bills, can be problematic, whether it's the end of the day or it's the end of the session. So this rule would allow House members to vote to postpone a bill that has a pending point of order upon a motion of 5 members and, of course, a majority vote. If the vote passes, the motion and the bill are withdrawn until the point of order is fully resolved. Once this happens, the bill becomes the next item up for consideration, so it doesn't lose its spot, if you will. Members, we expect swift and sure rulings from our parliamentarians, but that's not always possible, and it's not always in our best interest. Sometimes these issues are complicated and might require checking previous rulings from parliamentarians. They might require looking at a congressional ruling. I believe a couple years ago, Representative Martinez Fisher and I were arguing a point, and I think he even cited Leviticus as part of his program. So you've got to give the parliamentarian time to work things out. We don't want to rush that, but we don't want the rest of the calendar held hostage. So members, this is a way we can choose to keep our business moving ahead, and I would certainly move for adoption here in a moment after some questions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Huberty.
I'd like to ask the gentleman a question.
Gentleman yield for a question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, as you presented this morning, and you talked about this at the Rules meeting, you actually brought it up at several of the Rules meetings.
Right.
I think your intent is simply that if we have a point of order on a bill, and we know that our parliamentarians have suggested to us that they will rule quickly, but this will give us the opportunity as we get later in the session to be able to stop the gridlock and move our bills along. Is that not true?
Exactly. You know, if we find out, Representative Huberty, that they're going to say, Jim, we're about there, it's a minute away, this process won't be implemented. This is sort of an insurance policy that if things are grinding along and they need more time, we can put that aside and keep moving ahead.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, members, when you add lots of delays over the course of a session, it adds up.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Hunter.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Is there necessity for this rule change, or can it be done by the parliamentarian or under the parliamentary procedures that we have today without the rule?
Mr. Hunter, that's really not a proper parliamentary inquiry. It's more of a question to the author of the amendment.
All right. Mr. Speaker.
Or the author of the resolution when he returns to the mic to speak on the resolution. On the amendment, I mean.
I'll ask the author.
Thank you. So, Chairman Hunter, you could, under current policy, a member could decide to pull down their bill, and a member could decide to withdraw their point of order. That doesn't always happen. That's been my experience. Sometimes people, for whatever reason, don't want to, and this would allow the body to have the option to move ahead in spite of that. But no, any member under the rules could bring this motion, I think. I do know it is not a privileged resolution, or a motion rather, and it has to be recognized by the Speaker. So the Speaker could well say, we're about to get a ruling, we're not going to recognize that motion at this time.
Jim, since we're doing rule amendments, the question is, I know you have good intent, but do we need an amendment to these rules if the parliamentarian can do exactly what you're saying? It seems to be we're duplicating an order and a procedure that the parliamentarian can already do.
Yeah, so I would say, Chairman Hunter, to that, a parliamentarian can't do that.
So you're saying the parliamentarian cannot?
It's the member's bill. It belongs to the House. We decide what to do with our legislation. They are here to advise the Speaker or whoever's in the chair at the time. So that's not something they can make happen. As a matter of courtesy, most people will do this. I'm just saying for those occasions where we don't have that level of courtesy, we'd like to have another sort of a plan B.
Well, then I do think we have a parliamentary inquiry if you're saying they can't do that. And so, Mr. Speaker, then I would re-ask my parliamentary inquiry, since the author of the amendment says we legally can't do this. My inquiry then of the parliamentarians is, can they or not? Because if they can, this is a duplicating procedure.
Mr. Hunter, under the rules currently, a point of order can be withdrawn and the bill can be temporarily postponed while the matter of the point of order is researched.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Herrera.
Parliamentary inquiry, please.
Please state your inquiry.
In the representative's explanation of the amendment, he used, I believed, interchangeably the terms question of order and point of order. And the way I see the rule written, it says question of order. So the specific inquiry is this. Are the terms or is the phrase question of order and point of order interchangeable, or are they two separate meanings?
They are not synonymous.
Right. And so, as I see the rule written, and I think the way the amendment is written, and this is no longer a parliamentary requirement, Mr. Speaker, will the representative yield for question?
Mr. Murphy, you yield. Gentleman yields for a question.
Representative Murphy, I share concerns, as I think Representative Hunter does, in that it appears that your amendment, especially as explained, is limiting the ability of the people to be able to work an issue out that they may have about a bill or the particular policy issue that is in question on the bill. And so it's been my experience, both as asserting the point of order and as a person that has a bill that is the subject of a point of order, that the authors of each respective procedural measure work those issues out, and sometimes it's not within a matter of minutes before that can happen. And so out of courtesy to the floor, both authors of the bill and author of the point of order decide to withdraw those so that they can work those issues out. And sometimes, as it was the case last session with annexation, it took more than just those two members. It took essentially a committee of members to work those issues out. And so I'm trying to figure out do you believe that the current process as it exists in the rules is not, I guess, what is your concern with the current procedure that allows the members themselves to try to work these issues out?
I think the concern I have is one where when things come to a halt and that issue is being resolved or researched essentially by other parliamentarians, not necessarily even the members, that we could proceed with other business before the House. And again, I'm pointing out, and you understand, Representative Ferrero, this is a vote of the body if they want to proceed with other business. So it's a majority issue.
Yes, but I guess the point that I have is that it still removes the ability of the authors to be able to work these issues out. And I say authors, the person asserting the point of order and the person who has the measure. And again, I bring the example of annexation last session because there was a lot of issues and individuals that would have been on the floor to be able to vote one way or the other on this procedure that you're asking to implement were actually on the back on the third floor trying to work out these issues, and so we wouldn't have been able to participate. And so that's my concern, is that and again, it's been my experience that when it's understood from the parliamentarian's office or the speaker that more time is going to be needed to research the issue, that courtesy has been extended to the speaker and the parliamentarian's office to be able to make sure that the issue is researched fully so that there is a proper ruling on the point of order.
Well, and I think what this does is absolutely preserve that process. I, too, have been part of that. So this takes nothing away from it. It just allows that issue to be resolved while the other business goes on. And, you know, we want to give them the time they need to do it and not try to rush that process. But sometimes, as you know, that can take quite a while.
So under your scenario, what would be the circumstance if it's the last bill on the calendar?
Well, there'd be nothing to get to, so I don't think you would have anything to address.
And then the other argument would be if there are other bills, right, and you want to be able to get to the other bills, and that is also subject to a point of order, are you going to have then that many number of votes to be able to get past that?
I'm sorry, can you ask that question again?
In other words, the assumption, I think, is that it only happens once in a calendar, but it could be that it happens multiple times where there's multiple bills that are subject to points of order. And for each one of those times, then you're going to ask to be recognized by the Speaker to make a motion to essentially, I guess, postpone that bill and the point of order, and then ask for a vote on that measure?
You know, if you were recognized for that motion, yeah, we could end up with several instances of this.
That are all procedural, not even substantive on the actual matter, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. You know, members, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I am concerned about the delays we have in this process that I think sometimes are well-intended and perhaps not always the case. That being said, I have a number of joint authors now for my study bill, and I appreciate all of them offering their support. And so at this moment, I will slink back to my desk and withdraw this amendment. So thank you.
Members, The amendment is withdrawn, and I want to thank Representative Murphy for showing us all the respectful, collegial way to work through an issue. Thank you, Representative Murphy. Mr. Middleton.
Question for the author, Mr. Speaker.
We're waiting to lay out an amendment. Mr. Kane, if you don't mind. Yep, thank you. Following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Middleton.
Chair recognizes Mr. Middleton to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. So this is a very simple amendment. It is a term limit for both committee chairs and the chair, the speaker, of 3 consecutive legislatures starting yesterday, actually. So from the 86th session forward, this is something that actually I've spoken a lot with my constituents about. This is a constituent-driven thing. This is a promise I have made my constituents. Term limits are very important in my district. I can't speak to y'all's districts if they are important in yours, but they are in mine. And this is something that they would like to see done. And, you know, I announced for office in June of 2017, and at that time it was looking like we were going to have a 12-year speaker at that point. So this is where that comes from. It's moves forward, so it does not look backwards, and I move passage.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy.
Mr. Speaker and members, what this amendment does, and Mr. Middleton has been very good about visiting about this. He feels strongly about this, but it's term limits on the office of Speaker and office of committee chairs in the House of 3 terms. Here's the problem, just from a technical standpoint, is that we've already elected a Speaker for this session. We have a Speaker, unless our current Speaker vacates the chair at some point during his term, we will not be electing a new Speaker this session. And these rules expire at the end of this, not of the session, but at the end of this term, assuming we don't have any special sessions. These rules go away, and they have no effect. They have no impact on anything. So this is really an exercise in something that is not relevant to anything that could possibly happen. We have no member in the House who has served 3 consecutive terms as Speaker at this time, so there is no member that would be ineligible under this. If this were to be done, it would probably need to be done either by a statutory change or more likely by a constitutional change, because the Speaker is a constitutional officer, a statewide constitutional officer. And so because of that, I'll leave this to an up and down vote on the House, but it would have really there is no real reason to be doing this, even if you favor term limits on the presiding officer of the House. Ms. Thompson.
Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Thompson.
Will the gentleman yield?
Would you yield, Mr. Smithy?
Will yield, yes.
Yes, he will, ma'am.
Mr. Smitty, this amendment actually usurps the rights of the membership if they would choose to go beyond 3 terms.
That's correct. We would place a limitation on ourselves as to whom we could elect Speaker. The other issue is there is a bit of a constitutional issue here, because the Constitution defines eligibility for Speaker as a member of the House of Representatives. if we were to pass this, we would be imposing another extra constitutional restriction on who could serve as Speaker, and that might not be constitutional.
Mr. Smith, you're aware that this is my 7th speakership that I will be privileged to serve.
That's correct, yes.
May I share with you my first one?
Yes.
The first speaker race that I was privileged to serve, Mr. Gehring, can we have order in the House?
Members, let's have order.
The first speakership that I was privileged to serve was under Price Daniels Jr. And he did the same thing that our this esteemed colleague is doing. He limited his speakership to 1 term. It was the most chaotic session of this legislative body because he made himself a lame duck and he was unable to get anything accomplished of significance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes Mr. Middleton to close.
Thank you, members. I do understand that this is a House rule. This is not a constitutional amendment. This is something within this body. It is a constitutional issue, but we don't send this to the Senate to vote on it and amend it for us. So this is an agreement amongst ourselves, just like seniority is referenced in this book as well. Or confidentiality is referenced in this book as well among members and the parliamentarian, and that extends to prior sessions also. So basically, this is a way to vote on something that I promised my constituents, is the bottom line. I promised them this, and that's why I brought it up today, and that's why I want to vote on it today. This has been done before, so what's in this rule book is amongst us. But like, for example, in the U.S. House, the current Speaker Pelosi agreed to a 4-year term limit on herself. And then in the contract with America in 1995, then Speaker Gingrich, we're not Congress, but this has been, there's precedent. There's congressional precedent in this rule book. That's why we have congressional precedent in this rule book. So with the contract with America, committee chairs are limited to 6 years. So 3 sessions. So this rule book does have consequences. It is not inconsequential. The entire state budget was killed with this rule book by Arlene Wolgemuth. So there are real consequences by this rule book. And it is an honor amongst ourselves, and it keeps decorum and civility. And I rule that, or I move that we vote. Thank you.
Members, Mr. Mays Middleton puts up an amendment. A question occurs in the adoption of the amendment. The record vote has been requested. A record vote is granted. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed to the amendment, vote no. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Dean voting no. Show Mr. Middleton voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 11 ayes, 128 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Stickland.
The chair recognizes Mr. Stickland.
Members, this is actually a change that we've been talking about for a couple of years, and I just want to explain it really quick to you guys because I think this is of benefit to all of us individually as members. When a bill is going before a committee and someone from the general public wants to testify in a bill, they have 2 different options. They can register to personally testify in the committee, or they can do what many of us around this building call dropping a card, and that is simply just registering for or against a bill that is being heard. They don't have to testify. And what my amendment simply does is it opens up our ability as members to offer this service to our constituents back at home. My constituents are about 3 or 3.5 hours away from the city of Austin. And they have to travel down here currently and drive, take out time and the cost associated just to register for or against a bill. What my amendment would do would be to allow each one of us to use the computer systems that are already available in our district offices so that our constituents do not have to come physically to Austin simply just to drop a card. I think this will allow us to hear from our constituents more on how they care about a bill, and allows the public to get more involved in the process and takes their government closer to home. This amendment is a may, it is not a shall, and I think that it will help all of us and allow us to provide a service to our constituents, those of us who are not just a couple of minutes or a walk away from the Capitol. And I move passage.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, I told Mr. Stickland this is something that the House can decide what it wants. Whatever the House wants to do, the House can do. But I think everybody has to understand the implications of this. What this means is, and most of you have seen this before, but it would allow in each of our district offices, it would allow us the opportunity to let constituents come and register basically for or against a bill almost in real time, the day of a committee hearing. There have been a number of concerns expressed by members of the legislature, which I'm sure you'll hear about in just a second, but a couple of those have been, one is the integrity of the process. First of all, how you guarantee quality control over the names that you have on the list, whether those names are actual and real names. The second thing that has been some concern is this could raise implications as far as people with disabilities, whether they would have the opportunity. For example, our committee clerks are trained specifically with registering people who have sight impairment or blindness to register as witnesses. Not all district employees have that training or have that capability. And so it would raise some issues as far as Americans with disabilities. The other issue that we've heard expressed has been from some rural members who may have constituents that live 100 miles or even more from their district offices, as well as many members in this House who do not maintain district offices during the legislative session, that this might put those districts at some disadvantage as far as input into legislation. So this has been one of those amendments that's been discussed. There obviously are advantages. You have greater opportunity for citizen participation, but you also have some disadvantages as well. And so this is one that I will leave to the will of the House. It can certainly be done, and it's really however the House wants to address the issue.
Members, is there anyone wishing to speak on, for, or against the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Springer to speak against the amendment. And members, real quick, Mr. Springer, I apologize. If any members desire to speak on, for, or against the amendment, please let us know at the desk. Chair recognizes Mr. Springer against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
I absolutely understand what Representative Stickland's trying to accomplish, and how we can get those people more engaged is always a good manner. But this definitely puts rural Texas at an uneven footing with urban Texas. And that's simply because I have district constituents that live more than 300 miles away from my district office. And so they can't travel to my district office, just like many of the people in Representative Stickland's, which are inside 300 miles to Austin, can't drive to Austin. And so when all the yeses and nos are all tabulated up on a bill for the fors and against, rural Texas is now on an uneven footing. And I don't think it's the intention of this body to have one district not represented in the same manner that would be represented in other districts. And it's a little bit closer for some. But, you know, with that, with all due respect, I think we should study, find a way to get citizen involvement to potentially be able to do that. But I think it has to be fair for every single one of the 28 million people in the state of Texas, and not having some that are in compact districts more
Mr. Speaker,
advantaged.
will the gentleman yield?
Does the gentleman yield? Happy to yield. Gentleman yields.
Representative, what about, and I have a district that has a lot of elderly people, and it's difficult for them to make it to Austin. It's difficult for them. It'll be a challenge just for them to get to my district office.
And I 100% agree with that. I have the same problem. I have probably one of the oldest districts from an age standpoint. And once again, those people can't drive 300 miles to my district office, just like your elderly ones can't drive up here to Austin. And that's why I think that we ought to find a bill, find a way to do a study to figure out what is fair to allow each and every one, rather than being able to say, you know, that one group has an advantage geographically over another.
Drew, we're moving more and more as a House towards electronic means by which to vote. We're no longer going to be allowed to move from desk to desk with our bills. We're going to have to go into the clerk's office to do that electronically. We're moving more towards a virtual application and coming into the 21st century to pull more people into the process. And this process does help us do that as a state.
And if my constituents could register a for and against by sending a text message in, they would love to do that. And that would be a more even footing. They would say no on this amendment because they don't want to have to drive the 200, 300 miles to the district office.
Speaker.
Mr. Stickland.
This gentleman yield for some questions.
Gentleman yield. Happy to yield. Gentleman yields, Mr. Stickland.
Representative Springer, I understand where you're coming from, but in my mind, can you explain to me why this is worse for rural Texas? Because when I think about it, we're not taking anyone's options away. So they can still come to Austin the way they are right now. This amendment would simply allow some of us, and again, it's a may, not a shall, that if you want to, you can open up your office, which may or may not be closer. But it's just giving an option.
I mean, if you'll take an amendment that says that we can have a district office in every single county and the state will pay for each one of those district's offices, I'd probably be for it, because then I can have 22 district offices paid for by this body. And then it would be fair to my constituents. But that is not the situation that we're in today.
I understand.
And so when we draw those circles and say, how close do you live to a district office? All of yours are within 30 miles of your district office.
Right, I understand
and the vast majority of mine are not. And that is why it's a disadvantage to rural Texas.
But do you acknowledge that
So if we have a bill that's based on urban versus rural or suburban versus rural on a bill, and we're starting to tabulate the fors and against on that bill, you're going to see rural Texas absolutely disadvantaged in this.
Well, I don't think so, because my bill is not restricting rural Texas. This is giving rural Texas another option.
But it's the same. It's the same as Donna Howard's district today having an advantage because she's in Travis County versus Tarrant County for you.
Right.
You solve your problem, but you make it worse for mine.
I don't think
absolutely make it worse, because now everybody in Tarrant County is going to get to do a for and against. Everybody in Travis County gets to do a for against. But those people in King County and Dickens and Crosby and Cottle and all those are not going to get to do that because they can't drive 300 miles to my district office.
And I understand what you're saying,
I've asked for extra district offices to be on the western side, and I've been denied because
you are only allowed one district office.
Well, and I would tell you right now that I don't understand the needs of your district like you do, obviously, and I think that's an issue that we need to discuss and is worth talking about. But my amendment doesn't restrict that conversation. That, in my mind, Representative Springer, that is a different conversation. This amendment is simply giving your constituents and my constituents just one more option. And maybe they need 10 more options like you're suggesting, but this at least gives them one more.
I understand.
And again, this is not a requirement.
And I totally respect, as I said, I think if we found a way where all 28 million people had the same advantage to be able to register for or against, I would absolutely support it. But I know that I know from the districts traveled that is not the case with this.
Okay, Representative Springer, let me ask you this question. Would you support my amendment if you knew that you were going to be allowed to have a district office in every county of your district?
And I would also have to have the funds to be able to pay for 28 district offices.
If you had the funds and the ability to open up more district offices in your large rule, would you vote for my amendment?
If that's the solution that this body wanted for, that would work for me.
But would you support it?
Yeah, I would.
Okay,
I just said
well, let's go ahead and do
this.
this part of it, and then I'll work with you on getting you more district offices. How about that?
I don't think I can't support one until the other ones are taken in there. And that's
Well,
what
let's
I said.
work on
I think
it
it ought to be
together.
on a study.
Because for a lot of us, Representative Springer, I only need one option realistically, and I know you need more, but this is good for Texans. It allows their voice to
It's
be
good
heard
for some
more.
Texans. I absolutely agree.
And I pledge to you that if you will rethink your support for this, that I'll work with you on getting more district offices on that. Will you change your mind, Representative Springer?
I'm going to stay against the amendment. I understand and I appreciate your willingness to work. Look, rural Texas is way outnumbered in this body, as we always have been. And I'm just going to stand up and represent my district. And I know how I'm going to vote, and I'm not telling anybody else that they've got to follow me.
Members, is there anyone else wishing to speak on, for, or against the Stickland amendment? Seeing no one, the chair recognizes Mr. Stickland to close on his amendment.
Members, thank you for taking the time today. I just want to clarify a couple of things. This is not an anti-rural Texas. In fact, I personally believe, I'm sympathetic to what Representative Springer said about needing more district offices and resources for y'all that have expansive districts that us urban or suburban folks don't have. But this is one step closer. This allows rural Texans to have another option in having their voices heard without having to come to Travis County or Austin. So please vote for your constituents to have the option, if you so choose, to have their voices heard from your office, which, by the way, is already technologically set up to handle this. This isn't going to cost $1. It's not going to change any policy. We're ready to go. This is a may, not a shall, and I ask for your vote.
Mr. Stickland, Mr. sends up an amendment. Question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. A record vote has been requested. A record vote is granted. The clerk will ring the bell. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Show Mr. Patty voting no, Mr. Smithy voting no. Have all voted? Have all members voted? Show Mr. Middleton voting aye. Have all voted? There being 115 ayes and 127 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. I'm sorry, I misspoke. 15 ayes. Following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment. Right. That's right.
Amendment by Heflin.
Recognize Representative Hefner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment just simply codifies in the rules the co-author system that we have been using prior. I just believe this is an important tool in the toolbox for members to use to work their bills on the floor, to get to know other members, and to answer questions about their bill and kind of learn where the traps are. And just, I think it's an important part of the process. And it would not permit the clerk from implementing an electronic co-author system in addition to the paper co-author system that the House has used last session. And so I want to thank Mr. Haney. I've had several conversations with him about this in the past. I want to thank them for the great work that they do. But like I say, this is just to codify what we've been doing in the past to maintain this important tool that we have to work with our members. So I'd love to have you all support on it. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield?
Does the gentleman yield, Mr. Hefner?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Good to see you, Representative.
You too.
Just curious, I'm not opposed to your amendment. What does the clerk say about this? Because I think the rationale is, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I think the rationale is it's hard to keep track of the amount of bills, the amount of paperwork, the form leaving, form getting lost. What happens if all these other members have signed and member misplaces it? I'm curious. What's the logistics problem? What could go wrong?
Well, and I'm not aware of very many problems in the past with this system, but that's why we did not prevent an electronic process from being implemented. The main purpose is to make sure that we have that member-to-member interaction on the floor, that we don't lose that. So if we can take our paper to the floor or an electronic device that allows us to do the same thing is the goal. So I'm all for electronics coming into the 21st century and the efficiency of it, but I just don't want to lose that member-to-member interaction.
Thank you.
Did I move passage?
Chair recognizes Mr. Guerin in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendments and members, this amendment is well intentioned, but as the custodian of the records, the chief clerk in the past has allowed those to be taken out, and some of them were misplaced. And in my conversations with the chief clerk, if we stick with the paper, you're going to have to go in there to sign it, just like you're going to have to do the electronic. And he is not going to allow, as the custodian, as the legal custodian of the records, he is not going to allow those copies to be taken out. So we can either stick with what we've got and it stays in there, or we can upgrade and go to the electronic system, and you're going to have to do it in there. So no matter if this amendment goes on or not, the paperwork is not going to leave the chief clerk's office. So I'd ask you to vote no on this amendment.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy on the amendment.
And members, I might just say we're putting our chief clerk in a very difficult situation legally, ethically, in a number of ways when we try to remove a document that's in his custody and possession. He has legal responsibility for maintaining the integrity of that document. And there were a couple of instances last session where a member took out one of those sponsor or author sheets and it got lost. It never went back to the clerk's office. That's not the bill. That's not the member's problem. That's the clerk's problem. And it puts him in a very, very difficult situation. One of the possible solutions to that, as Mr. Guerin mentioned, is going to an electronic system, which they're prepared to do. But as an accommodation to the members, a number of members had raised some issues with going so quickly to this electronic system, which I think we'll probably go to eventually. That didn't go into this resolution, and so as kind of a compromise in between, they decided to stay with the paper system, but to keep that paper in the clerk's office because of really putting the clerk in a situation that's just not fair to the clerk. So.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mrs. Swanson?
Yes, I have an inquiry about how this would work.
Would you, do you want to ask the Mr. Smithy
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry
Mr.
if I didn't
Smithy,
say
do you yield for a
the
question?
right word.
Ms.
Yes,
Smithy
thank
yields
you.
for a question. No
Okay.
problem.
It's been a year and a half.
We got to get
Okay.
back in shape. You're
Yes,
good.
right. My question would be, could we at least keep it where the way we had it before, where you could take a blank piece and you could get as many signatures as you wanted before you ever took it to the clerk's office, and so you're never taking out any signatures you already have?
Well, I think the answer to that, Ms. Watson, is you could do it maybe once before you take it into the clerk's office, but you can't you can't start a new sheet every day or after you've done the original sheet. I think you could probably take a sheet around, get a number of signatures on it, and then file it with the clerk, because the clerk would not have legal custody of that until you filed it with the clerk. But once it is filed with the clerk and goes in the clerk's office, you would not be able to either take it out or to add another sheet to it.
Okay, Chairman Smithy, could I get what I'm hearing is you think it'll be that way, and I respect that. Could we get like a definite, will we be allowed that or not?
Will you be allowed what?
To get the signatures, the first signatures before we ever turn the page in. Can we be assured that we can still do that?
The clerk tells me absolutely you could do that, yes.
He does. Everybody's in agreement on that.
Under the rule as it's written, yes.
I think knowing that would reassure a lot of people,
Okay.
and thank you for that commitment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on, for, or against the amendment by Mr. Hefner? Seeing no one, the chair recognizes Mr. Hefner to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there are several ways we could maintain the integrity of the documents. We could make a copy when people check the sheet out. We could implement an electronic system where we could log in on our iPads and do it electronically where it uploads immediately. And so I think there's plenty of ways to do this, but still maintain that member-to-member interaction to advance our bills. So again, I ask for your support and appreciate y'all's time. Thank you.
Members, 1 second. Hey. That's fine. Paul, do you mind if we just breathe? Okay, let's turn the mics off. Members, thank you for your patience. We're now going to have a division vote on Mr. Hefner's amendment. So please, those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. It's a division vote. We're going to give you time to vote from your desk. There being 24 ayes and 83 nays, the amendment fails. Strike the board. Mr. Dutton. Following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Amendment by Dutton.
Chair recognizes Mr. Dutton to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in 2011, I had a problem with the Senate and the Senate amendments. And the Senate essentially doesn't have germaneness rules, which means they can put well, they don't follow them anyway, but they take House bills at the end of the session and they put non-Senate, non-House germane amendments on it. And so I was trying to stop that because what they tell you when you go over there is, well, if you don't accept the amendment, we won't take your bill. We won't consider your bill. And so the reason for this amendment came because of that. And I said, talk to the parliamentarian.
Mr. Dutton, hold on one second. Members, let's please give Mr. Dutton the courtesy and take your conversations outside the rails. We've had a few members have expressed they're not being able to hear him. So members, please let's take our conversations outside the rails and give Mr. Dutton the courtesy of his conversation. Mr. Dutton, go ahead.
Senate. The problem with this amendment is that there are two ways in which to attack Senate non-germane amendments. One is with a point of order by a member. And typically what this amendment was trying to do in 2011 was create a House rule that had basically a barrier to non-germane Senate amendments so that they would automatically go back and they wouldn't have to be considered by a member. So that would mean you wouldn't have to raise a point of order against the amendment. Now, the parliamentarian has been kind enough to provide me numbers that indicate that when the Senate non-germane amendments to House bills have gone back to the Senate just they've just not passed the bill for the most part. And that's not the outcome I was looking for, but I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not sure what the answer is, and we've had this amendment on the House rules since 2011, and things haven't gotten better, but I think we probably ought to analyze it in terms of whether things could have gotten worse, because the non-germane Senate amendments continues to be a problem for every House member, and particularly at the end of the session where you don't have much choice. And so I think taking this amendment off perhaps does some unintended harm that we didn't want to have happen, because we'd like to say to the Senate, please don't put non-germane amendments on House bills.
Mr. Speaker.
And that's essentially what this does.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Kane.
Does the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield for a question?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Dutton, I had a chance to come visit with you before this, and you showed me some numbers of what happens. Could you enlighten the body of these numbers? Because I think they're really important to hear.
Well, for example, in last session, there were nine bills returned to the Senate based on Rule 13, Section 5A. Out of those 9 bills that were returned to the Senate, 7 of them died in the Senate. So that means only 2 got signed by the governor and got considered. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, as you know, around here, it looks like one thing and something else happens. I suspect that some of those bills that appear on here as having died in the Senate simply got placed on other bills, because that's one of the ways to get around this. But the numbers do indicate that the bills that are returned under Rule 13, Section 5A are generally not passed by the Senate. And so that's the reason I offer this amendment to you all for the House's consideration. And essentially, it places Rule 13.5A back into the House rules is what it does.
Mr. Murphy.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
The gentleman yields, Mr. Murphy.
Representative Dutton, these bills that died, as you said, when they go back to the Senate, that is really a factor oftentimes of timing, just simply not being enough time to get things done through the session, and your change would allow an earlier consideration of those matters back and forth.
Well, and more immediate, because what happens is if they come to the House under this rule, the Speaker has to send it back. So you don't have to go through bringing it up on the House floor, somebody raising a point of order, and the like. And so, as you know, at the end of the session, time is of essence.
It is. No, I think this helps both in the sense of moving that particular item forward and keeping the calendar clear of items that aren't going to make it. So I think you have a great change.
Exactly. And that may be one of the benefits of this, having this amendment in the House rules. And so, Mr. Speaker, I move passage.
Chair recognizes Mr. Smithy on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, I want to try to make sure everybody understands exactly what this does, because some of your bills may pass or fail depending on whether this rule change goes on or not. And I can tell you, I know what Mr. Dutton is trying to do, and I certainly agree with the spirit of what he's trying to do. And his amendment basically brings the rules back to where they were last session. And let me tell you why this change went in there. Back in the old days, when Harold and I came in originally, the Senate has no real germaneness rules. And so we typically would get a lot of non-germane amendments. They would load up House bills. These are your bills. These are House bills that go to the Senate. Typically, the Senate would load those up with amendments you never thought of, you never saw or you never thought of before, send them back over here, and they would pass their agendas that way on our bills. A few sessions ago, the House adopted a rule where non-germane amendments were automatically stripped at the administrative process without ever reaching the floor of the House, which has been a good thing in some ways, but it's created some consequences that have been a bit of a problem. Once again, these are our bills. And so what typically has happened is that once the Speaker's office sends those bills back to the Senate, your bills just die over there. And so in effect, we have allowed the Senate to kill our bills by simply putting a non-germane amendment on the bill, which has had the effect in practice of killing our bills by something the Senate did. So the purpose of this amendment, and once again, the House can do whatever the House wants to do on this, but the advantage to Mr. Dutton's amendment is very clear, is that it goes back to the old system, and it tells the Senate in advance, if you put anything that's not germane, it's not going to go anywhere in the House. But the downside of that is the Senate's reaction to that is just to kill the bill, to kill your bills. So the House can deal with that however it wants to deal with, but that's I think the issue that we're facing.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on, for, or against Mr. Dutton's amendment? Seeing no one, the chair recognizes Mr. Dutton to close on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, again, in 2011, the problem was that the Senate was putting and placing non-germane amendments on House bills. And that's what the problem is, because it come back over here, and if for some reason the parliamentarian doesn't catch the non-germane amendments, the Senate will hold you hostage as a House member by saying, look, if you don't keep the non-germane amendment on there, we won't pass your bill. And what this amendment does, it says it's not left up to the member, it's the Speaker's prerogative to send it back to say, Senate, please follow your rules and have germaneness. I understand the Senate does have germaneness rules. They simply don't follow that in most cases. And as you know, members who've been in before, at the end of the session, that becomes extremely critical to you. And so I think this, as Chairman Smithy indicated, there are obviously pluses and minuses on this amendment. But I think the pluses far outweigh the minuses, such that the House ought to say to the Senate, as I said last session, if the Senate won't respect us, they need to expect us. You're right.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Members, the question occurs on the Dutton Amendment. This will be a division vote. All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Members, we're going to give you time to get to your desk. There being 65 ayes and 71 nays, the amendment fails. Strike the board. Come on up. Members, we have probably two more amendments. If you need an amendment drafted, please get it to the desk. Chair now would like to recognize Representative White for recognition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And members, I just want to take just this opportunity to welcome the Coleman Bulldogs to their Texas House. They're here in the gallery, or they're waving at us. You can go ahead and stand. Go ahead and stand. And also recognize their UIL Congress debate coach, Mr. Smith. You're doing a great job. Thank you very much. Welcome to your house.
Mr. Burrows, Mr. Martinez Fisher. Following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Martinez Fisher.
Chair recognizes Representative Martinez Fisher to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, first, this is an amendment that we've been working on. You're going to hear from Representative Dustin Burrows in a minute, working with trying to figure out a way to bring some more order to chaos when we have points of order. What this amendment does is it allows anybody with a question of order, anybody who calls a point of order, that person and another person that is designated could argue a point of order at the front with the parliamentarian, and any member with a bill and the person they designate can also make the arguments on their behalf. So in other words, it just limits the amount of voices, not the number of bodies, so that we can have an orderly intellectual discussion about rules and how they're deliberated. And I will yield to co-author Dustin Burrows.
I think the idea is sometimes, especially on the larger
Chair
bills.
Mr. Burrows.
Thank you. I think sometimes on the larger bills, a lot of people want to, jump in and do everything, and sometimes tempers get a little bit hot. And this is an idea of trying to keep more orders. We're actually dealing with points of orders, and I think that we've worked on this to make sure it's two people instead of just one. And I think it's a very good amendment.
Mr. Martinez, anyone Anyone wishing to speak on, for, or against the amendment? The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there any objection to the adoption of the amendment? The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. Members, let me. I didn't want to rattle Mr. Smithy or anyone up here, but we're getting questions about tomorrow, so let me address that. One, I need to remind you it is a joint session between the House and Senate here at our house tomorrow at noon. So it is our intent for the House to convene tomorrow at 11:30. And that joint session, of course, is to canvass the vote for the governor and lieutenant governor to resolve that for the inaugural on Tuesday. And again, I'll remind you, we intend to not come back in until Tuesday and take the Monday to provide the courtesy for those who are preparing for the inaugural, allow them to have full access to the grounds and the building on Monday to be ready for that. So we'll be in at 11:30 tomorrow. We'll have the joint session at noon. We will then adjourn until Tuesday. And then we have one amendment that Representative Davis is working collaboratively with others to get done. So we're going to give her the patience to get that done in the form she wants. Chair recognizes Representative Toth for a recognition.
Members and guests, I'd like to take this opportunity for us all to welcome some members of the firefighting community that are from House District 15. Lloyd Sanderford, President of the Conroe Firefighters Association, and Eric Seacrest, President of the Woodlands Firefighters Association. These folks have achieved the highest ISO designation that's available. They're incredible men, and we want to thank them for the work that they do on behalf of keeping us all safe. God bless you guys, and welcome to your house.
Mr. Guerin. Members, several of you also asked what time we would come in on Tuesday. It will either be 9:30 or 10. The reason it would be 9:30 and not 10 is that we don't have that answer today. But due to security for the inaugural and for members being seated, we may need to come in at 9:30, but we're going to work through that issue between today and tomorrow. And obviously, when we adjourn tomorrow, we'll adjourn till that time. But for travel planning, it will be either a 9:30 or 10 a.m. Tuesday morning. Sorry, members, we're just showing a transparent process here. We're now going to recognize Mr. Guerin to talk even more about what we might do on Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, they've asked that those of you who will be attending the inaugural be in the House area of the seating. About 10:30, the inaugural starts at 11, and the prayer service is at 9 that morning. So at 10:30, they're asking that, and It's going to be on the north side of the Capitol this time for the first time, and there is a designated area for House members and their guests. So please, if you're going, try to get down there by about 10:30. Thank you.
Are we ready for ceremony? Chair recognizes Representative Stevenson for a recognition.
I'd like to recognize Joey Cardenas, UIL congressional competitors, Congress competitors from Louise, Texas, my district. Would you please stand up?
Members, at this moment, this is the last amendment that we have on our desk. The following amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Amendment by Davis of Harris.
Chair recognizes Representative Davis of Harris to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I was reading the synopsis of the rules last night, and some changes that were being made to the General Investigating and Ethics Committee caught my eye when I looked at read the rule proposal more thoroughly. I became concerned that the committee was losing jurisdiction over all matters pertaining to the conduct of and ethical standards applicable to state and local officers and employees, including individuals appointed to office of the executive branch of state government for the purpose of ensuring that appointed officer is acting in the best interests of the state of Texas. The rules also removed jurisdiction over the operation of, including transparency in the reporting of financial transactions by agencies of the judicial and executive branches of state government and affiliated entities. So not only did this concern me, I believe that it violates code because the authority of the General Investigating Committee is contained within the statute, within the government code. So I'd like to thank the Speaker and his staff with working with me, and what this amendment does is it replaces the language in the rules in front of you with the exact language from the code that outlines the exact statutory jurisdiction that General Investigating has and that cannot be altered through the rules. It also keeps all of the language dealing with sexual harassment and the policies that are being adopted. There's no change to that. And I believe that the amendment is acceptable to the author.
Members, the amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. Members, we are out of amendments. Does anyone wish to speak on, for, or against the rules? The resolution. Seeing no one, the chair recognizes Mr. Smithy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I want to thank the membership for resolving a number of the issues that came up. Members got together with other members across party lines and across different demographics and worked those out, and that is really a great thing for all of us, and that made this whole job pretty easy for y'all to do that. So thank you all very much for doing it. Mr. Kane.
Mr. Kane.
Question for Mr. Smithy.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Smithy, first off, I want to thank you for what began as a partisan discussion on rules turned into a nonpartisan thing. So thank you. I think we all owe an applause to Mr. Smithy. Everybody give him one? No? Everybody gives
Thanks.
And I thank you. I brought to you a rule change months ago, and we got to work with the parliamentarians, and I just want to ask you about it. Some will see that Rule 14, Section 8 is now stricken, and I believe that you, along with the parliamentarians and working with us, actually made it better. And so now, when they're explaining a final ruling, what is it that's supposed to be included in it? Is it now they have to cite all the authority, just everything like that? And so do you feel like that's an improvement?
Yeah, I think it clarifies that, and I think it does give us some historical basis, some record to go forward that hopefully will promote the uniformity of decisions.
Well, thank you for working with me on that
Thank
amendment.
you for seeing that, coming up with it. So, if there's nothing further, members, I would move adoption of the rule.
Members, question occurs on the adoption of House Resolution 4. It is a record vote, required record vote. The clerk will please, members, those in favor vote aye, those opposed vote nay. Record vote, clerk will please ring the bell. Have all voted? Have all voted? There being 142 ayes and no nays, House Resolution 4 is passed. Members, I want to thank Chairman Smithy for his work on the rules. He did a great job. But he also couldn't have done such a great job without the cooperative nature that the members worked in. There were 2 different working group meetings that were held, and members showed up and participated with great respect and deference to each other on that. The parliamentarians did a wonderful job, and I think the working group that I appointed in the beginning did a great job of getting us in a good direction on that. So I want to thank all of you for working together on getting our rules done. And for those of you that had concerns before today about the rules, I also am proud to tell you that I personally was basically uninvolved in the rules, as I had expressed to many of you that I didn't believe the Speaker should involve himself or herself in the rules, being they are your rules for your governance during the session. Now that the rules are passed, you will be getting a memo in your mailboxes later today that will have the preference cards for committees. The memo will explain the process on committees. I will ask your mercy. I've never had the privilege of assigning committees before, but I know one thing for certain: it is the hardest job any speaker has to do. So I would be lying to say I'm looking forward to it. With that said, I am looking forward to each and every member that desires to sit down with me before those committees are assigned. I welcome a meeting with every one of you. That is your choosing. But my office door will be wide open, and I hope every member will come visit about their interest and their participation this session in the committee process. So that memo with that preference card will be in your mailboxes later today, and look forward to sitting down with each and every one of you that desires to. With that, members, Mr. Canales. A recognition. Chair recognizes Mr. Canales for a recognition.
Mr. Speaker, members, today we've got Melissa and Michael, who are students from EdCal Chelsea. If you'd please rise, welcome to your house. Their sponsors are Jack and Marissa. Thank you for being here.
Chair recognizes Mr. Dutton for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To all the members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, the meeting room has been changed to room E1022. That's E1022, immediately upon adjournment.
Members, the Speaker's desk is clear. If there are any announcements or recognitions, let us know. Chair recognizes Representative Bowers for a recognition.
Good afternoon. I'd like to recognize 2 of my most precious and prized constituents, Lorianne and Jeff Sheldon. Lorianne Dagowski. If you look up this way, there you go. Thank you. From House District 113.
If there are no other announcements, Chair recognizes Representative Kane that we adjourn until 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. We are adjourned.